Apophenia. You're scrolling through your phone at 2 a.m. 3 different people mention the same song. Different conversations, completely unrelated. Then a coworker brings it up at lunch. You hear it playing in a coffee shop the next day. It can't just be random. The universe is trying to tell you something. Except it isn't. Your brain is wired to find patterns, to link cause and effect, to make sense of chaos. And most of the time, that's useful. Early humans who heard rustling in the bushes and assumed danger survived. The ones who ignored it didn't. So the brain learned to connect dots, to see meaning in noise, to treat coincidence as signal. But that wiring doesn't turn off when the threat is gone. The brain keeps searching for patterns even when there's nothing to find. It connects dots that don't belong together. It assigns meaning to randomness. And once you notice something, you can't unsee it. That's apophenia. The mind's refusal to accept that some things just happen. The tricky part is that it doesn't feel like a mistake. It feels like insight. You're not imagining things. You're seeing what everyone else is missing. That's why conspiracy theories spread so easily. Random, unrelated events get woven into a narrative that feels intentional. The more connections you find, the more convinced you become. Not because the evidence is strong, because the brain rewards pattern recognition with certainty. It happens in smaller ways too. You think about an old friend. They text you an hour later. You dream about something. It happens the next day. You see the same number everywhere. None of it means anything. But your brain treats it like a message, a signal, proof that something deeper is at work. And the more you look, the more you find. Once your brain locks onto a pattern, it filters reality to match. You stop seeing what's actually there. You see what you expect to be there. The coincidences pile up, not because they're increasing, but because you're finally paying attention. Psychologists call this confirmation bias. It's apophenia's partner in crime. This is how people fall into superstition, pseudoscience, magical thinking. They see a pattern once, then again, and again, until it feels like proof. But the pattern was never real. It was noise. Randomness dressed up as meaning. And the mind, desperate to make sense of the world, grabbed onto it anyway. Apophenia doesn't make you irrational. It makes you human. But that's exactly why it's dangerous. When the brain finds a pattern, it stops questioning. It stops searching for alternatives. It locks in. And once that happens, breaking free feels impossible. Because how do you fight a belief your own mind built and insists is real? Pareidolia. You glance at an electrical outlet. It's staring back at you. 2 circular holes for eyes. A longer slot for a mouth. It's smiling. Or maybe surprised. Either way, you can't unsee it. Your brain refuses to see randomness when a face might be hiding. That's pareidolia. A specific form of pattern recognition so deeply embedded it overrides logic. You know the outlet isn't alive. You know the face isn't real. But your brain sees it anyway. This happens because the human brain is hardwired to detect faces faster than anything else. It's a survival mechanism. In early human history, recognizing a face, friend or predator, could mean the difference between life and death. So the brain evolved to prioritize facial recognition above all else. It scans constantly, looking for eyes, a nose, a mouth. Anything that resembles a face gets flagged immediately. But the system is overly sensitive. It doesn't wait for confirmation. 2 dots and a line are enough. A shadow on the wall. A cluster of clouds. A burn mark on toast. The brain sees the pattern first. Asks questions later, and by the time logic catches up, the illusion is already locked in. That's why people see faces everywhere. In the moon, in tree bark, in the front of a car. It's not imagination. It's the brain doing exactly what it was designed to do, just in situations where the design doesn't apply anymore. The wiring stayed the same. The environment changed. And it's not just faces. Pareidolia extends to any familiar shape the brain expects to recognize. Animals in clouds, figures in shadows, hidden images in static. The brain fills in the gaps, turns ambiguity into something concrete. Pattern completion. Automatic. Whether you want it or not. This is why religious experiences often involve seeing divine figures in everyday objects. A water stain that looks like a saint. A piece of wood that resembles a holy symbol. The brain isn't creating something from nothing. It's imposing meaning onto randomness, the same way it imposes a face onto an electrical outlet. Same mechanism, scaled-up interpretation. Pareidolia feels harmless when it's a smiley face in your coffee, but it becomes a problem when the brain starts assigning significance to the patterns it finds. Once you see something, once the brain locks onto a shape and labels it meaningful, convincing yourself it was never there becomes nearly impossible. The pattern feels too real, too intentional, too specific to be random. And that's the trap. Pareidolia doesn't just make you see things that aren't there. It makes you believe they were meant to be seen. That the universe placed that image in front of you for a reason. The randomness disappears. The meaning takes over, and the brain, satisfied it found what it was looking for, stops questioning entirely. You're not hallucinating. You're just human. But that's exactly why it works. Patternicity. You've been stuck in traffic 3 days in a row. Always the same spot. Always around the same time. There's a pattern here. Maybe if you leave 5 minutes earlier tomorrow, you'll miss it. Or take a different route. Or skip that coffee stop. Something in the routine is causing this. Except traffic doesn't work that way. It's chaotic. Thousands of independent decisions colliding at random. But your brain can't accept that. It needs an explanation. A cause. A pattern it can predict and control. The brain evolved to detect patterns because survival depended on it. See a snake in tall grass once, you learn to spot snakes everywhere. The cost of missing a real pattern was death.
Yeah.
The cost of seeing a false one was just wasted energy. So evolution built a detection system that errs on the side of overreaction. Better to see patterns that aren't there than to miss the one that is. Psychologists call this patternicity, the tendency to find meaningful connections in random data. And it doesn't stop at traffic. You wear your lucky shirt to a job interview. You knock on wood. You avoid walking under ladders. All because your brain took random outcomes and forced them into a pattern. Interview went well last time you wore that shirt. Pattern detected. Never mind that 100 other variables were in play. The brain locked onto the shirt. Sports fans do this constantly. They sit in the same seat because their team won last time. They wear the same jersey. They follow the same pre-game ritual. As if their behavior miles away from the field has any effect on the outcome. But the brain doesn't care about logic. It cares about patterns. And when the team wins, the pattern gets reinforced. Never mind the losses in between. Those get filtered out. It happens in relationships too. Someone doesn't text back for a few hours. Your mind spirals. They're losing interest. They met someone else. They're pulling away. A pattern forms from almost nothing, but correlation isn't causation. They might just be busy. The delay might mean nothing. Yet the brain has already constructed a narrative, complete with evidence that doesn't exist. Patternicity made sense in a world where threats were real and immediate. But in modern life, most randomness is just randomness. The traffic has no pattern. The shirt has no power. The delay has no hidden meaning. But convincing your brain of that feels impossible. Because once it detects a pattern, real or not, it treats that pattern as truth. And trying to unsee it is like trying to unsee a face in the clouds. Illusion of control. You have a job interview in 2 hours. You're wearing the same outfit you were to the last interview that went well. You took the same route, ordered the same coffee, sat in the same spot while you waited. It's not superstition. It just feels safer this way. But none of it matters. The interviewer doesn't care what you wore last time. The route doesn't affect the questions they'll ask. The coffee won't make you more qualified. You know this. And yet you did it anyway. Because when the outcome is uncertain, the stakes are high. The brain craves control. Even fake control. Even the illusion of it. This need runs deep. Studies show that people perform better on tasks when they believe they have control, even when they don't. Gamblers think they can influence a dice roll by throwing harder or softer. Investors believe they can time the market. Patients feel better when they choose which identical pill to take. The control is imaginary. But the psychological comfort is real. The illusion works because the brain conflates action with influence. If you do something and the outcome is favorable, the brain assumes a connection. You press the elevator button multiple times. The elevator arrived. Pattern reinforced. Next time, you'll press it again. Never mind that the elevator was already on its way. The brain recorded a sequence and treated it as cause and effect. It shows up in high-pressure situations. Athletes with pre-game rituals. Students with lucky pens. Traders who won't make a move until the conditions feel right, even though markets are fundamentally unpredictable. The ritual doesn't change the outcome, but it changes how they feel going into it. And sometimes that's enough to shift performance. Not because the ritual worked. Because belief in the ritual reduced anxiety, which freed up mental resources to focus on what actually mattered. But there's a darker side. The illusion of control makes people stay in situations they should leave. They think if they just try harder, say the right thing, adjust their behavior, they can fix what's broken. A failing relationship, a toxic job, an unsalvageable investment. They double down on effort, convinced that control is just one more action away. And when it doesn't work, they blame themselves for not finding the right combination. Not the situation for being beyond their control. The illusion doesn't make you delusional. It makes you feel less helpless. But that feeling comes at a cost. Because when you believe you control things you don't, failure stops being about circumstance and starts being about you. And that's a weight the mind was never meant to carry. Gambler's fallacy. The coin lands on heads, then heads again, and again, 5 times in a row. If you had to bet on the next flip, what would you pick? Tails, right? Because it's due. Because the streak has to break. Because randomness balances out. Wrong. Wrong. The coin doesn't remember. It doesn't know it just landed on heads 5 times. Each flip is independent. The odds are still 50-50. But your brain doesn't process it that way. It sees a streak and assumes correction is coming. That's the gambler's fallacy. The belief that past outcomes influence future probabilities in situations where they don't. This thinking destroys people in casinos. A roulette wheel hits black 6 times in a row. Players flood the table betting on red. They're convinced it has to hit red soon. The wheel is due. But the wheel doesn't care what happened before. Each spin is a separate event. The odds never change. Yet people keep betting, pouring money into a pattern that doesn't exist, convinced that probability will correct itself. And the casino profits from that exact misconception. It's not just gambling. It shows up everywhere. A baseball player goes heightless for a week. Farms start saying he's due for a hit. A stock drops 5 days straight. Investors think it's bound to bounce back. A couple has 3 daughters. They're certain the next one will be a boy. As if the universe keeps score. As if probability has a memory and a plan to even things out. The fallacy reverses too. Someone wins twice in a row and assumes they're on a hot streak. That luck is on their side. That the universe is rewarding them. They keep playing, betting bigger, convinced the streak will continue. But streaks are just random clustering. They don't mean momentum. They don't mean anything. And when the streak breaks, which it always does, they're left trying to explain what went wrong, when the real answer is that nothing went wrong. Randomness was always random. The brain falls into this trap because it's hardwired to detect cause and effect. If something happens repeatedly, there must be a reason. A force. A pattern. But randomness doesn't follow patterns. It clusters. It streaks. It creates sequences that look intentional but aren't. And the brain, desperate to make sense of it, invents rules that don't exist. The gambler's fallacy doesn't make you stupid. It makes you human. But in a world where randomness governs more than we'd like to admit, treating independent events like they're connected turns probability into a story. And stories, no matter how convincing, don't change the odds. Magical thinking. There's no such thing as coincidence. That's what people say when something improbable happens. When they think about someone and that person calls. When they almost miss a flight and later find out it was delayed. When a song plays at the exact moment they needed to hear it. It's the universe. It's fate. It's a sign. But it's not. Magical thinking is the belief that your thoughts, actions, or rituals can influence outcomes in ways that defy physical causality. It's the idea that wishing makes things happen. That rituals bring luck. That coincidences carry messages. And it's everywhere. Knock on wood. Throw salt over your shoulder. Don't say the quiet part out loud or you'll jinx it. These aren't just traditions. They're operational beliefs. People genuinely feel like these actions do something. Children naturally think this way. They believe their thoughts have power. That monsters disappear if you hide under the blanket. That birthday wishes come true if you don't tell anyone. It's a developmental stage, one most people are supposed to grow out of. But many don't. The logic shifts from obvious magic to subtle superstition, but the core belief remains. Actions and thoughts can bend reality. This happens because the brain is built to find causality. When two things occur close together, the brain assumes a link. You wore a certain color and had a good day. You avoided cracks in the sidewalk and nothing bad happened. You said a prayer and got the news you wanted. The brain files it away. Cause and effect. The fact that millions of other variables were involved gets ignored. The brain picked the one that felt meaningful and ran with it. Athletes are notorious for this. A pitcher wears the same unwashed socks for an entire winning season. A basketball player eats the same meal before every game. A runner refuses to wash their lucky shorts. They know intellectually that the socks don't control the game. But they can't risk breaking the pattern. Because what if it does matter? What if removing the ritual removes the luck? The logic doesn't hold, but the fear does. It shows up in everyday decisions too. People avoid certain numbers. They won't open an umbrella indoors. They turn around if a black cat crosses their path. They make wishes at specific times. They attach meaning to dreams. And when something bad happens after they ignored the superstition, it reinforces the belief. See, I knew I shouldn't have done that. The mind finds confirmation wherever it looks. Magical thinking doesn't make you irrational. It makes you desperate for control in a world where most things are beyond your influence. But the cost is that you start living in a reality where invisible rules govern visible outcomes. Where thoughts become actions. Where meaning is assigned to randomness. And once you believe the magic is real, every coincidence becomes proof. Every failure becomes a missed ritual. Every success becomes validation. And the line between chance and causation disappears entirely. Synchronicity belief. You're thinking about an old friend you haven't spoken to in years. An hour later, they send you a message. Out of nowhere. No reason. Just happen to be thinking about you too. It feels impossible. too specific to be random. Like the universe connected you at the exact same moment for a reason. But the universe doesn't work that way. Your brain does. Synchronicity is the idea that events are meaningfully related, even when there's no causal connection. That coincidences aren't accidents. They're messages, signals from something bigger. The term comes from psychologist Carl Jung, who believed certain coincidences were too meaningful to be explained by chance alone. He called them synchronistic events, moments where the inner world and outer world align in ways that feel intentional. The problem is that meaningful doesn't mean connected. The brain is designed to find significance in patterns. When two unlikely things happen close together, it feels like they must be linked. But probability doesn't care about timing. Unlikely things happen constantly. Across billions of people having billions of thoughts every day, some of those thoughts will coincide with events purely by chance. The odds of it happening to someone, somewhere, are actually quite high. The odds of it happening to you just feel low because you're only tracking your own experience. And once it happens, the brain remembers it. You think about dozens of people throughout the week. Most of them don't call. But the one time someone does, right after you thought of them, that moment gets filed away as significant. The misses disappear. The hit gets replayed. And the more you notice these moments, the more you start looking for them. Suddenly, synchronicities are everywhere. Songs on the radio, numbers on license plates, conversations that echo your thoughts. None of it means anything beyond coincidence. But it feels like proof. People build entire belief systems around this. They see repeated numbers and assume the universe is speaking to them. They have a dream and something similar happens the next day, so they start trusting their dreams as premonitions. They meet someone at the exact moment they needed guidance, so they believe in fate. The brain takes random alignment and turns it into narrative, into purpose, into evidence of something beyond the material world. Synchronicity belief doesn't make you mystical. It makes you human. The brain craves meaning. It wants the universe to be more than chaos. So when coincidence offers even the faintest hint of design, the mind grabs it. And once you believe the coincidences are connected, every new one becomes confirmation. The pattern builds itself. And walking away from it starts to feel like ignoring the truth. Clustering illusion. Why do bad things always happen in threes? You hear about one celebrity death, then another, then a third. 3 accidents on the same highway in the same week. 3 rejections in a row. It can't be random. There's a pattern here. A cluster. Proof that events don't distribute evenly. That when something starts, it keeps going. Except they do distribute evenly. And the pattern isn't real. Randomness doesn't spread things out neatly. It clumps. If you flip a coin 100 times, you won't get a perfect alternation of heads and tails. You'll get streaks. Runs of the same outcome that look anything but random. But that's exactly what randomness does. It clusters. And the brain, expecting even distribution, sees those clusters and assumes something else is at work. Psychologists call this the clustering illusion. The tendency to see patterns in random sequences just because events happen to occur close together. A basketball player makes 5 shots in a row. Fans say they're on fire. The player feels it too. Hot hand. The streak feels real. But statistical analysis shows that players don't actually shoot better during streaks. The makes are just randomly distributed, and sometimes randomness creates runs. The hot hand is an illusion. The cluster is chance. It shows up everywhere. You get 3 emails from the same person in one day after weeks of silence. Must mean something. You see the same car model repeatedly on a single drive. Can't be coincidence. Someone mentions a word you just learned, and suddenly you hear it 5 more times that week. The brain files it as meaningful, as a cluster that needs explanation. But it's just noise behaving like noise. The illusion is stubborn because clusters feel too intentional to ignore. If events were truly random, they'd be spread out, right? True randomness includes clustering. It includes streaks, gaps, and uneven distribution. But the brain doesn't expect that. It expects order, balance. So when randomness delivers its natural clumps, the mind rejects the possibility that it's just chance and starts searching for a cause that isn't there. People use this to justify superstitions. They see bad things cluster and assume a curse. They see good things cluster and assume divine favor. They track streaks in gambling, in weather, in relationships, and treat the clusters as evidence of momentum, as proof that outcomes aren't independent. But they are. The cluster doesn't mean the next event is more or less likely. It just means randomness did what randomness does. And the brain, expecting patterns, invented one where none existed. Hot hand belief. The player sinks 3 shots in a row. The crowd erupts. The commentator says it. They're in the zone. They can't miss. Feed them the ball. Teammates start passing more. Opponents defend tighter. Everyone believes it. The player's hot. The hand is on fire. The streak is real. But it's not. The shooter isn't more likely to make the next shot just because they made the last 3. The odds haven't changed. The hand isn't hot. It's random clustering dressed up as momentum. Sports fans live and die by the hot hand. A batter gets 3 hits in a row, so they move up in the lineup. A quarterback throws 2 touchdowns, so the offense keeps passing. A poker player wins 3 hands straight, so they start betting bigger. The belief is universal. Streaks mean something. Success breeds success. The hand stays hot until it cools. The problem is that decades of research show the hot hand doesn't exist. Players don't shoot better during streaks. The makes and misses are randomly distributed. What looks like momentum is just the natural clumping of random events. The brain sees 3 successes in a row and assumes the 4th is more likely. But probability doesn't work that way. Each shot is independent. The previous makes don't influence the next attempt. Yet the belief persists, because it feels true. When you're winning, you feel different, confident, locked in. The ball feels lighter. The rim looks bigger. That subjective experience is real, but it doesn't translate to actual performance. The feeling of being hot doesn't make you shoot better. It just makes you think you're shooting better. And when you miss, it doesn't break the streak. It's just noise. But when you make it, the belief gets reinforced. See, I told you I was hot. The hot hand belief extends far beyond sports. Investors think they're on a winning streak and take bigger risks. Salespeople close 3 deals in a row and assume the 4th is guaranteed. Even in everyday decisions, people treat recent success as evidence that success will continue. The logic breaks down under scrutiny, but the feeling is too strong to ignore. Because when you're in the middle of a streak, it doesn't feel like randomness. It feels like skill, like control, like the universe finally aligning in your favor. And when the streak ends, which it always does, people don't blame randomness. They blame themselves. They think they lost focus. They changed something. They let the hand go cold. The belief survives because it explains success without threatening identity. When things go well, it's momentum. When things go badly, it's a lost streak. Never just chance. Because admitting the streak was random means admitting you were never in control. And that's a truth the mind refuses to accept. Superstitious conditioning. You don't actually believe in luck. You know the shirt doesn't matter. The coin doesn't care. The ritual has no power. But you do it anyway, because what if it does? What if the one time you skip it, everything falls apart? Superstitions don't start with belief. They start with coincidence. You wear a certain pair of socks. Your team wins. You wear them again. The team wins again. Logic tells you the socks aren't causing the wins. but something deeper takes over. A pattern forms, and the brain, wired to avoid risk, decides not to test it. Better to keep wearing the socks than to find out what happens when you don't. This is superstitious conditioning, the process by which random reinforcement creates ritualized behavior. Psychologist B.F. Skinner demonstrated this with pigeons. He put them in a box and delivered food at random intervals. The pigeons started repeating whatever behavior they happened to be doing when the food appeared. One would spin in circles. Another would peck a specific corner. The food had nothing to do with their actions, but the timing made it seem connected. And once the pattern formed, the pigeons couldn't stop. They were conditioned by coincidence. Humans do the same thing. A gambler pulls the slot machine lever with their left hand and wins. Next time, they use their left hand again. A student uses a specific pen on a test and does well. That pen becomes their lucky pen. An athlete eats the same breakfast before every game because it worked once. The brain doesn't need proof. It just needs a sequence. Action, outcome, repeat. And the behavior locks in. The conditioning deepens because breaking the pattern feels dangerous. You've done the ritual 10 times. 10 times things went well. Now you're supposed to skip it. What if that's the variable that tips everything? The logical part of your brain knows it's irrational, but the emotional part can't afford to take the risk. So you keep doing it. And every time things go well, the superstition strengthens. Every time things go badly, you assume you didn't do the ritual correctly. Or you missed a step. Or you let doubt weaken it. The belief becomes unfalsifiable. Superstitious conditioning isn't harmless. It creates a false sense of control that can spiral into compulsion. People develop elaborate rituals they can't abandon. They structure their lives around actions that have no effect. And when the rituals fail, which they inevitably do, the response isn't to abandon the superstition. It's to add more rules, more steps, more precautions. Because if the ritual worked before, it must still work. You just have to find the right combination. The cruelest part is that you know it's irrational. You can see the absurdity. But knowing doesn't break the conditioning. Because the cost of being wrong, of skipping the ritual and losing, feels greater than the cost of continuing. So you keep the lucky pen. You keep the socks. You keep the routine. Not because you believe. Because you can't afford not to. Coincidence misattribution. You're running late. You rush to catch the train. You make it with seconds to spare. As you sit down, you think, I'm so lucky I made it. But are you? Or did you just successfully execute a series of actions and the timing happened to work out? The train was always going to leave at that time. You were always capable of running that fast. There's no luck involved. Just outcome, just timing. But the brain labels it lucky anyway. People misattribute coincidence constantly. They avoid a certain road and later hear there was an accident. They feel like they dodged a bullet. Like some instinct saved them. But they weren't going to be in that accident. They were never on that road. The coincidence is that they heard about it afterward. Not that they avoided it. The brain connects two unrelated facts and creates a narrative of near miss, of fate intervening, of luck protecting them. Or the opposite happens. Someone takes a different route to work and gets stuck in traffic. They think, of course, I knew I shouldn't have changed my routine. But the traffic wasn't caused by their decision. It was already there. The coincidence is just that they encountered it. Yet the brain treats the deviation as the cause, as proof that changing patterns invites chaos. And next time, they'll stick to the routine, convinced that straying brings consequences. The misattribution works both ways. Good outcomes get credited to actions that didn't cause them. Bad outcomes get blamed on decisions that didn't matter. You send an important email and get a positive response an hour later. You assume the timing mattered. That's sending it exactly when you did made the difference. But the response was already going to be positive. The recipient was already planning to reply. The timing is irrelevant, but your brain assigns meaning to the sequence anyway. This creates false feedback loops. You take a specific action, an outcome occurs. The brain links them. The next time you face a similar situation, you repeat the action, expecting the same result. Sometimes it works, which reinforces the belief. Sometimes it doesn't, which you explain away as circumstance. Either way, the coincidence hardens into causation. And you start organizing your behavior around patterns that don't exist. Misattribution feeds superstition. It feeds anxiety. It feeds the belief that your actions have more influence over outcomes than they actually do. And it makes randomness feel personal, like the universe is responding to your choices, rewarding you, punishing you, testing you, when in reality most of what happens around you is going to happen regardless. The coincidence is just that you were there to witness it. And the brain, desperate for control, turned presence into causation. Meaning projection. A book falls off a shelf. You pick it up. It's the exact book you needed to read. The exact advice you were looking for. At the exact moment you needed to hear it. This can't be random. The universe is telling you something. But the universe isn't telling you anything. You're telling yourself. Meaning projection is the process of assigning significance to neutral events based on your internal state. The book didn't fall because you needed it. It fell because it was poorly balanced, or because the shelf shifted, or because of a dozen physical reasons that have nothing to do with you. But you were in a specific emotional state, searching for answers. And when the book fell, your mind grabbed it as a sign, as evidence that the universe was listening, that your thoughts were being answered. The event itself has no meaning. A book falling is just gravity, but the brain doesn't experience events neutrally. It filters them through context, through mood, through need. And when an event aligns with what you're thinking or feeling, the mind treats it as intentional, as a message, not because the event changed, because your interpretation did. People do this constantly. They're thinking about making a major decision. They turn on the radio, and a song plays with lyrics that seem to speak directly to the choice they're facing. Coincidence. But it feels like guidance. They see a word written on a billboard that matches a conversation they just had. Random. But it feels like confirmation. They encounter a stranger who says something that echoes their exact thoughts. Chance. But it feels like the universe aligning. The projection intensifies when you're emotionally vulnerable, when you're uncertain, when you're looking for direction. Because in those moments, the brain is scanning for anything that might provide clarity. And neutral events, events that happen constantly without anyone noticing, suddenly get flagged as significant. The billboard was always there. The song plays on rotation. The stranger talks to everyone. But because you needed meaning, you projected it onto them. This isn't inherently harmful. Sometimes the meaning you project motivates you, encourages you, gives you permission to do what you were already leaning toward. But it becomes a problem when you start depending on external signs to make decisions. When you stop trusting your own judgment and start waiting for the universe to tell you what to do. Because the universe isn't speaking. You're just interpreting noise as language. And the more you rely on that process, the less capable you become of acting without it. Meaning projection doesn't make you spiritual. It makes you human. The brain is built to seek meaning. To find order in chaos. To make randomness feel purposeful. But when you treat every coincidence as a message, you give away your agency. You stop making choices and start waiting for signs. And the signs, which were never real to begin with, become the framework through which you navigate the world. until you can't tell the difference between what the universe is saying and what you're saying to yourself. Omen Interpretation. A bird crashes into your window the morning of an important meeting. You've never seen that happen before. It feels wrong. Like a warning. Should you reschedule? Stay home. The meeting goes badly. You knew it. The bird was trying to tell you something, except the bird wasn't trying to tell you anything. It saw a reflection. It miscalculated. It died because of glass, not because of your future. But your brain linked the two events anyway. Impact, meeting, outcome. The sequence felt intentional, so you filed it away as a sign. Next time something unusual happens before an event, you'll be watching for it. Waiting for the universe to speak again. Omen interpretation is the practice of reading meaning into random or ambiguous events and treating them as predictions. A black cat crosses your path. A mirror breaks. You spill salt. These things happen constantly. But when they occur near a significant moment, the brain assigns them weight, turns them into warnings, into messages from something beyond normal causality. The pattern starts with anxiety. When you're worried about an outcome, your mind scans the environment for anything that might hint at what's coming. A strange noise. An unexpected encounter. A minor disruption. Under normal circumstances, these events pass unnoticed. But when you're already on edge, they get flagged. The brain treats them as data, as clues. And once you notice one, you start seeing them everywhere. Ancient cultures built entire systems around this. Priests read entrails. Oracles interpreted dreams. Augurs watched the flight patterns of birds. None of it predicted the future. But it gave people a sense of control in an unpredictable world. A framework for making decisions when the stakes were high and the information was incomplete. The omens didn't work because they were true. They worked because belief in them reduced paralysis, gave permission to act. Modern omen interpretation is subtler but just as pervasive. You check your horoscope before making a decision. You notice the time on the clock and decide it's a sign. You see repeated symbols and treat them as confirmation that you're on the right path. The logic is the same. External events are speaking. You just have to learn the language. But omens don't predict, they reflect. When you're worried, you see warnings. When you're hopeful, you see encouragement. The event itself is neutral. A bird is just a bird. A number is just a number. The meaning comes from you. From your mood. From your need to feel like the universe is paying attention. And once you start interpreting events as omens, every outcome, good or bad, becomes proof. If things go well, the omen was accurate. If things go badly, you ignored the warning. Either way, the belief survives. And the next time something unusual happens, you'll be ready to read it. Lucky streak belief. Everything's been going your way. The presentation went perfectly. The traffic cleared. You found a parking spot right in front. Even the coffee tastes better today. You're on a streak. Luck is flowing. And as long as you don't jinx it, it'll keep going. But luck doesn't flow. Events don't connect just because they happened in the same day. The presentation went well because you prepared. The traffic cleared because of timing. The parking spot was random. The coffee is the same coffee you drink every morning. None of it is linked, but the brain strings them together anyway. Builds a narrative. Creates momentum where there is none. Lucky streak belief is the conviction that good outcomes cluster and that the cluster will continue. It's the flip side of the gambler's fallacy. Instead of thinking a streak must end, you think it must continue. That you've entered a hot phase. That the universe has tilted in your favor. And as long as you don't disrupt the pattern, the luck will hold. Athletes talk about being in the zone. Gamblers talk about riding the wave. Investors talk about having the Midas touch. The language changes, but the belief is identical. Success is building on itself. The wins aren't independent. They're connected by something invisible: momentum, energy, favor. And the more you win, the more likely the next win becomes. The belief feels rational because streaks are real. Random events do cluster. You can have a string of good outcomes purely by chance. But the mistake is assuming the streak has predictive power. That because the last 3 things went well, the 4th is more likely to go well too. Probability doesn't work that way. Each event is independent. The coin doesn't remember. The dice don't care. The universe isn't keeping score. Yet people act as if it does. They make risky decisions during lucky streaks. Bet bigger. Push harder. Take chances they wouldn't normally take. Because they feel protected. Like the streak is a shield. Like as long as it lasts, failure isn't possible. And when the streak breaks, which it always does, they don't see it as randomness returning to normal. They see it as something they did wrong. They broke the spell. They got cocky. They jinxed it. Lucky streak belief doesn't just distort perception. It distorts behavior. It makes you overconfident when things are going well and overly cautious when they're not. It turns random variance into personal narrative. Into a story where you're either blessed or cursed, chosen or abandoned. And the cost of that story is that you stop seeing outcomes for what they are. Just outcomes. No pattern. No momentum. No streak. Just chance doing what chance does. Curse attribution. Nothing's working. The job interview fell through. Your car broke down. Your phone died. A friendship ended. All in the same week. This isn't bad luck. This is something else. Something targeted. Like you're being punished. Like something out there has it in for you. People don't call it a curse anymore. Not out loud, but the belief is still there. Buried under modern language. I'm cursed. I can't catch a break. The universe is against me. It's the same logic, dressed up in softer words. The idea that misfortune isn't random. That it's directed. That someone or something is causing it. Curse attribution is the tendency to interpret clusters of negative events as intentional rather than coincidental. It's the dark mirror of lucky streak belief. When bad things pile up, the brain refuses to accept that it's just variance. Just randomness behaving like randomness. Instead, it searches for a cause. A reason. And when no logical explanation appears, it reeks for the invisible. A curse. Bad karma. Divine punishment. Negative energy. The specifics change depending on your beliefs. But the core is the same. You've been marked. And until the curse lifts, nothing will go right. The belief gets reinforced by how the brain handles negative events. Bad outcomes are more memorable than good ones. They carry more emotional weight. So when several bad things happen close together, they feel connected. They feel like a pattern. Meanwhile, the good things that happened in between get filtered out. Ignored. Forgotten. The brain constructs a narrative where everything is going wrong, even when the data doesn't support it. Curse attribution shows up in relationships. A string of failed dates becomes proof that you're undateable. That love isn't meant for you. That you're somehow blocked from finding connection. The failures aren't independent events with independent causes. They're symptoms of a deeper problem, a pattern you can't escape. And the more you believe in the pattern, the more you behave in ways that reinforce it. You stop trying. You self-sabotage. You approach new opportunities with the expectation that they'll fail too. And when they do, it's not because of your behavior. It's because of the curse. Breaking curse attribution requires rejecting the narrative. Recognizing that clusters are normal. That bad things don't need a cosmic explanation. That sometimes probability just delivers a rough stretch. But doing that means accepting randomness. Accepting that you're not being singled out. That the universe isn't watching. That misfortune doesn't mean anything beyond itself. And for a mind desperate for control, for meaning, for a story that makes sense, randomness is the hardest truth to accept. Signal in noise detection bias. You're lying in bed. The house is quiet. Then you hear it. A creak. A tap. Something moving. Your mind locks onto it immediately. Is someone in the house? Is something broken? Was that real or imagined? You listen harder. Another sound. Definitely something. You get up to check. It's nothing. Just the house settling. Just the wind. Just background noise you suddenly decided was significant. The brain is a signal detector. It's constantly scanning the environment, trying to separate meaningful information from irrelevant background. Most of the time, this works. You hear a car horn, you look. You smell smoke, you investigate. The system prioritizes signals that might matter and ignores noise that doesn't. But the system has a bias. It's set to overcorrect. To flag ambiguous inputs as signals rather than risk missing something important. Psychologists call this signal in noise detection bias. The tendency to perceive patterns, threats, or meaningful information in random or ambiguous data. And it's not a flaw. It's a feature. In evolutionary terms, it was better to mistake wind for a predator than to mistake a predator for wind. The cost of a false alarm was minimal. The cost of missing a real threat was death. So the brain evolved to err on the side of detection. To see signals even when they might not be there. But in modern life, where actual threats are rare, the bias creates problems. You interpret neutral data as meaningful. You hear static and think it's a voice. You see shadows and think they're figures. You read tone into text messages that was never intended. The brain is doing what it was designed to do. Finding signals. But the signals aren't real. They're just noise elevated to importance by a detection system that can't afford to be wrong. The bias feeds paranoia, conspiracy thinking, hypervigilance. When you're primed to see hidden signals, everything starts looking like evidence. A coincidence becomes a clue. A vague statement becomes a coded message. A pattern of unrelated events becomes proof of a larger design. The noise doesn't go away. It just gets reinterpreted, elevated, treated as if it carries meaning when it's just the background hum of a chaotic world. Breaking the bias means accepting that most noise is just noise. That ambiguity doesn't always resolve into meaning. That sometimes a creak is just a creak. But the brain resists. Because if you lower your detection threshold, you risk missing the one time the signal is real. And that risk, however small, feels unacceptable. So you keep listening, keep scanning, keep finding patterns in static. Not because they're there, because you can't afford to believe they're not. Agent detection bias. The bushes rustle. You freeze. Something's out there. You can feel it. Eyes on you. Movement just beyond your line of sight. You scan the area. Nothing visible. But the feeling doesn't go away. Something's watching. Something's there. This is agent detection bias. The brain's tendency to perceive intentional agents' minds, or consciousnesses behind events, especially ambiguous ones. It's the reason you feel like someone's watching even when you're alone. The reason you see faces in shadows. The reason you assume the noise in the attic is a person, not a rat. The brain defaults to agency, to intention. Because historically, assuming something had a mind was safer than assuming it didn't. If your ancestor heard a rustle and assumed it was just wind, but it was actually a predator, they died. If they assumed it was a predator and it was just wind, they wasted energy being cautious. Evolution favored caution. So the detection system became hypersensitive. Better to see agents that aren't there than to miss the one that is. The cost of overdetection was anxiety. The cost of underdetection was extinction. But the system doesn't shut off in safe environments. You walk through a parking garage alone at night. Every sound triggers the same response. Someone's following. Someone's hiding. The rational part of your brain knows the odds are low. But the detection system doesn't care about odds. It cares about survival, and survival means treating ambiguity as threat until proven otherwise. Agent detection extends beyond physical presence. It's why people see purpose in natural disasters. Why they interpret coincidences as messages from deceased loved ones. Why they feel like the universe is conspiring against them or guiding them. Events that have no mind behind them get treated as if they do, as if something is choosing, planning, watching. The bias assigns intention where there is none, turns randomness into agency, turns mechanism into mind. This is how religions form, how ghost stories spread, how paranoia takes root. The brain perceives a presence even when no presence exists. And once you believe an agent is involved, every subsequent event gets filtered through that belief. The wind isn't just wind. It's a spirit. The coincidence isn't random. It's fate. The misfortune isn't chance. It's punishment. The agent becomes the explanation for everything that doesn't have one. Agent detection bias doesn't make you paranoid. It makes you cautious in a world where caution once meant survival. But in a modern context where most rustles are just wind and most shadows are just shadows, the bias turns into a burden. You see intentions that don't exist. You feel watched when you're alone. You interpret the universe as a mind that's thinking about you. And breaking free means accepting the hardest truth of all. That most of what happens isn't personal, isn't planned, isn't caused by anyone at all. Fortune patterning. You get a promotion. 2 weeks later, you meet someone interesting. A month after that, you find money on the street. Good things are stacking up. You're in a fortunate phase. Life's finally working out. And you know deep down that it won't last. Because good fortune always runs out. The pattern swings back. The universe balances the scales. But the universe doesn't balance anything. Fortune isn't a wave. It's not a pendulum. It doesn't move in cycles. Good things cluster. Bad things cluster. Not because of momentum or cosmic accounting, because randomness doesn't distribute evenly. It clumps. And when it clumps in your favor, you call it fortune. When it clumps against you, you call it misfortune. But it's the same process. Just variance playing out over time. Fortune patterning is the belief that luck moves in predictable cycles. That periods of good fortune are followed by bad. That if things are going well, a correction is coming. That the universe tracks your gains and losses and evens them out. It's a seductive idea because it imposes order on chaos. It makes randomness feel manageable, predictable. Like if you can just identify the pattern, you can prepare for the downturn. Brace for impact. Protect yourself when the tide turns. People act on this belief constantly. They get superstitious during good streaks. They knock on wood. They refuse to celebrate too early. They hold back excitement because they don't want to jinx it. The logic is clear. If you acknowledge the good fortune, you'll trigger the reversal. The pattern will punish you for noticing. So you stay quiet. Stay cautious. Treat success like it's fragile, like it's on loan and about to be recalled. The belief also shows up during rough patches. People endure bad situations longer than they should because they think the pattern will shift. That they just have to wait it out. That if they've suffered enough, fortune will swing back in their favor. But fortune doesn't pay attention to suffering. It doesn't keep score. A bad month doesn't make a good month more likely. A string of losses doesn't make a win inevitable. The pattern is a story you tell yourself to make randomness feel less random. Fortune patterning gives you a false sense of control. It makes you think you can predict what's coming, that if you track the pattern, you'll know when to brace and when to relax. But the pattern doesn't exist. Outcomes are independent. Good things don't cause bad things. Bad things don't earn good things. The universe isn't evening the scales because there are no scales. There's just chance, clustering, variance. And the human need to believe it all means something. False causality. You start taking a new vitamin. 2 weeks later, you feel more energetic. The vitamin must be working. You keep taking it. A month goes by. The energy fades. You assume the effect wore off. Or maybe you need a higher dose. The possibility that the vitamin never did anything doesn't cross your mind, because the timing felt too perfect. Cause and effect, action and result. But timing isn't causality. Two things can happen in sequence without one causing the other. You felt tired. You took a vitamin. You felt better, but dozens of other variables changed during those 2 weeks. Your sleep improved. The weather got warmer. Work stress decreased. Any of those could explain the shift. Or none of them. Maybe you just had a good couple of weeks. But the brain doesn't track all variables. It tracks the one you acted on, the vitamin. And when the outcome aligns with the action, the brain draws a line between them. Permanent. Causal. Real. False causality is the error of assuming that because one thing followed another, the first thing caused the second. Post hoc reasoning. It's one of the most persistent cognitive mistakes humans make. And it's everywhere. You wore a specific outfit to an event. The event went well. The outfit becomes your good luck outfit. You changed your routine. Things improved. The routine becomes mandatory. You avoided a certain route. Nothing bad happened. The avoidance gets locked in as protective. The brain wants causality. It's how we make sense of the world. If X leads to Y, we can control Y by controlling X. That's useful when the causality is real. Fire causes burns. Studying causes better test scores. Exercise causes fitness improvements. But the brain applies the same logic to coincidences, to sequences that have no causal link. And once the false connection forms, breaking it feels dangerous. What if the vitamin was working? What if the outfit did matter? What if removing the pattern invites disaster? This is how superstitions spread. Someone does something unusual before a success. They repeat it. It works again. Coincidence. But the brain files it as causation. The action becomes ritualized. You knock on wood after saying something hopeful. Why? Because once you didn't knock and things went wrong. Never mind the hundreds of times you didn't knock and everything was fine. The brain remembers the one time the pattern seemed to hold. And that single data point becomes law. False causality doesn't just create harmless rituals. It distorts decisions. People stick with failing strategies because they worked once. They abandon effective approaches because the timing felt wrong. They credit success to actions that didn't cause it and blame failure on choices that didn't matter. The brain is searching for control, for levers to pull, for patterns to follow. But when the patterns aren't real, the control is an illusion. And the more you act on false causality, the harder it becomes to see what's actually driving the outcomes you're experiencing. Randomness misunderstanding. Flip a coin 10 times. It lands on heads 6 times, tails 4. That doesn't feel random. Random should be 5 and 5. Even. Balanced. But that's not how randomness works. Random doesn't mean evenly distributed. It means unpredictable. And unpredictable outcomes cluster. They streak. They create patterns that look deliberate but aren't. People expect randomness to look uniform, to alternate neatly, to avoid repetition. But true randomness includes runs of the same outcome. A fair coin can land on heads 5 times in a row. Not because it's rigged, because that's within the range of probable sequences. But when it happens, the brain rejects it, calls it suspicious, assumes something must be interfering, because the outcome doesn't match the mental model of what random is supposed to look like. This misunderstanding shows up constantly. A playlist shuffles your music. The same artist plays twice in a row. You assume the shuffle is broken. But random selection allows repeats. That's what makes it random. If the system prevented repeats, it wouldn't be random anymore. It would be forced distribution, controlled variety. But the brain doesn't intuitively grasp that. It expects randomness to smooth itself out, to self-correct, to look balanced in small samples. Randomness misunderstanding fuels the gambler's fallacy. A roulette wheel hits black 5 times straight. Players bet on red. They think it's due. That randomness has to balance. But the wheel has no memory. The next spin is still 50-50. The previous outcomes don't matter. Yet people pour money into the belief that randomness corrects itself. That streaks can't continue. That deviation from the expected average must resolve quickly. The misunderstanding also creates false patterns in data. A company's revenue drops for 2 quarters. Executives panic, assume a trend, implement changes. But 2 data points aren't a trend, they're noise. Random variance within normal fluctuations. The business might have been fine, but the expectation that outcomes should be stable, that randomness should be minimal, turned normal variance into crisis. And the response to imagined decline creates real consequences. Breaking randomness misunderstanding means accepting that chaos doesn't smooth itself out quickly. That small samples are unreliable. That streaks are normal. That patterns in random data are often just noise. But the brain resists. Because if randomness is truly random, then control is harder. Prediction is harder. Safety is harder. And the mind, built to seek order, would rather see false patterns than accept that some things just happen without reason, without balance, without any intention at all. Law of small numbers. You try a new restaurant. The food is incredible. You go back the next week. The food is mediocre. You're disappointed. The place went downhill fast. Or maybe the first visit was a fluke. Either way, you've made a judgment. 2 visits. 2 data points. And in your mind, that's enough to know what this restaurant is. But 2 data points aren't enough to know anything. Yet people treat small samples like they're definitive. They meet someone twice and decide they don't like them. They test a strategy once and declare it a failure. They have a bad experience with a brand and write it off forever. The brain takes limited information and extrapolates it into a stable pattern. A rule. A truth. Psychologists call this the law of small numbers. The mistaken belief that small samples reliably reflect the larger population or pattern. It's the opposite of actual statistics, where larger samples are needed to draw reliable conclusions. But the brain doesn't wait for large samples. It sees a few instances and assumes they're representative. That what happened in the small sample will keep happening. This leads to massive errors in judgment. A startup succeeds with an unconventional approach. Investors assume the approach is the key. They fund 10 more companies using the same model. Most fail. The original success wasn't about the approach. It was about execution, timing market conditions, or luck. But the small sample, one success, made the pattern seem real, replicable, guaranteed. The buyer's works in reverse too. A method fails once. People abandon it. Never mind that it might work under different conditions, with different execution, at a different time. The single failure becomes proof that the method is flawed. The small sample overrides all other possibilities. And the brain, convinced by the limited evidence, closes the case. Law of small numbers makes people overconfident in their conclusions. They think they know more than they do. They act on hunches built from insufficient data. They ignore variability. They treat outliers as norms. And when reality doesn't match their small sample predictions, they don't question the sample size. They question reality, or they assume something changed, that the pattern broke. When the truth is simpler, the pattern was never real. It was just noise. A few random outcomes dressed up as law. Regression misreading. You have a terrible day at work. Everything goes wrong. The next day is better. Not great, but better. You assume things are improving, trending upward, getting back on track. But they're not trending anywhere. They're just regressing to normal. And normal is where most days live. Regression to the mean is a statistical principle. Extreme outcomes, good or bad, are usually followed by more average ones. Not because anything changed. Because extreme outcomes are, by definition, rare. Most of the time, results cluster around the average. So after an unusually bad day, the next day is likely to be closer to typical. Not because of improvement. Because extremes don't sustain. But people don't see it that way. They see change, progress, decline. A student does poorly on a test. The teacher scolds them. The next test, they do better. The teacher thinks the scolding worked. But it probably didn't. The student's first score was likely an outlier, below their usual performance. The second score wasn't improvement. It was regression. A return to their baseline. The scolding gets credit for a change that was going to happen anyway. This creates false beliefs about cause and effect. Kooks yell at athletes after bad performances. The athletes improve. The coach assumes the yelling works, so they keep yelling. But performance naturally fluctuates. Bad games are followed by average games without any intervention. The yelling didn't cause the improvement. Regression did. But the timing makes it look causal. Regression misreading also makes people overact to variance. A company has an unusually profitable quarter. Leadership assumes the strategy is working. They double down. The next quarter is average. They panic. Assume the strategy failed. But both quarters were just variance. The high was a spike. The average was regression. No strategy shift was needed. Yet decisions got made based on noise. The misreading cuts both ways. After a great performance, people expect continued excellence. When it doesn't happen, they assume something broke. After a terrible performance, people expect continued decline. When it doesn't happen, they credit intervention. But neither expectation accounts for regression, for the natural tendency of extremes to move back toward the middle. And that misunderstanding turns randomness into narrative, into a story where actions matter more than they do, where variance gets mistaken for trajectory, where the normal ebb and flow of outcomes becomes evidence of progress or decay that was never there. Confirmation of lucky beliefs. You believe you're lucky on Fridays. Every Friday you pay attention. You notice when good things happen. A parking spot opens up right in front of the building. You get a compliment. Your coffee tastes better than usual. See? Friday luck. You knew it. The belief gets stronger. Confirmed. Locked in. But what about the Fridays when nothing good happened? What about the Tuesdays when the same good things occurred? You don't track those. The brain doesn't file them. Because they don't fit the belief. So they get filtered out. Ignored. Forgotten. And the only data that remains is the data that supports what you already think. That Fridays are your lucky day. Confirmation bias is the tendency to search for, interpret, and remember information that supports existing beliefs while ignoring information that contradicts them. And when it comes to luck, superstition, and pattern recognition, confirmation bias is the engine that keeps false beliefs alive. You don't test your beliefs. You confirm them. Over and over, with evidence that's selectively gathered and selectively remembered. People do this with everything. You think a certain number is lucky. You notice every time it appears and something good follows. You ignore the times it appears and nothing happens. You forget the times good things happen without the number. The belief survives because the brain is only collecting data on one side. The side that says you're right. This is how superstitions become uncheckable. You wore a specific item during a success. You start wearing it regularly. Sometimes things go well, sometimes they don't. But you only remember the successes. Those get attributed to the item. The failures get explained away. You didn't wear it correctly. You doubted. You mixed it with something unlucky. The belief adapts to protect itself. And confirmation bias makes sure only supporting evidence gets stored. Confirmation of lucky beliefs also happens in relationships. You think someone doesn't like you. You start noticing every neutral interaction as cold. Every lack of response as rejection. Meanwhile, the friendly moments get reinterpreted or dismissed. They were just being polite. They felt obligated. The belief that they don't like you gets confirmed. Not because it's true. Because you're only looking for evidence that it's true. Breaking confirmation bias means actively searching for disconfirming evidence. Tracking the misses, not just the hits. Counting the times the pattern didn't hold. But the brain resists. Because disconfirming evidence threatens the belief. And the belief, even if it's false, provides structure. Predictability. A sense of control. So the mind keeps filtering. Keeps confirming. Keeps building a case that feels airtight. Built entirely from half the data. And the other half, the half that would shatter the illusion, never makes it past the gate. Selective recall of coincidences. You think about your aunt. An hour later she calls. You haven't spoken in months. The timing feels impossible. Too specific. Too aligned. You tell people about it. They're amazed. It's proof, right? Proof that thoughts can reach across distance. That minds connect. That coincidences mean something. But you don't tell people about the hundreds of times you thought about your aunt and she didn't call. Or the times she called and you hadn't been thinking about her at all. Those moments don't register. They're not memorable. They don't feel significant. So the brain doesn't file them. Doesn't store them. Doesn't retrieve them when you're building your case for why the universe is speaking. Selective recall is the brain's tendency to remember events that fit a narrative while forgetting events that don't. And when it comes to coincidences, selective recall is what makes them feel frequent. Feel meaningful. Feel like evidence of something beyond chance. You remember the hits, the moments when timing aligned, when thoughts and events matched. But the misses disappear. And without tracking both, you can't assess whether the coincidences are actually unusual or just normal probability playing out. Think about how many people you think about in a given week. Dozens. Maybe more. Most of those thoughts lead nowhere. No call. No text. No random encounter. But once in a while, the thought and the contact align. Pure chance. But because you remember that one alignment and forget the dozens of non-alignments, the coincidence feels rare. Special. Statistically improbable. When in reality, given how many thoughts you have, a few coincidences are expected. Probable, even. Selective recall feeds every pattern-based belief. You think you perform better when you follow a certain routine. You remember the times the routine preceded success. You forget the times it didn't. You think a certain song brings bad news. You remember the occasions when the song played and bad news followed. You forget the times the song played and nothing happened. The brain curates your memory to support the story. To make the pattern feel real. To turn randomness into meaning. This is why anecdotes are unreliable. People share the coincidences, the eerie alignments, the moments that felt too perfect to be chance. But they don't share the boring majority, the times when nothing aligned, when thoughts went unanswered, when patterns failed to appear. And without that context, the coincidences seem far more frequent than they are. Far more meaningful than randomness allows. Breaking selective recall means keeping a full record. Writing down every time you think about someone. tracking whether they contact you, counting the hits and the misses. But most people don't do that, because deep down they don't want to break the belief. They want the coincidences to mean something. They want the universe to be connected, responsive, intentional. And selective recall lets them keep that belief alive, by only showing them the evidence that says they're right, and hiding everything else. Mystical pattern binding. The numbers keep appearing. 333. On receipts, license plates. The time on your phone. Every day, sometimes multiple times. It has to mean something. The universe doesn't repeat itself this much without reason, so you start looking it up. Angel numbers, spiritual messages, cosmic alignment, and every explanation feels right, because the pattern is too consistent to ignore. But it's not consistent, it just feels that way. Because once you started noticing 333, your brain began filtering for it. You see it everywhere now. Not because it's appearing more, because you're paying attention. Meanwhile, every other number combination passes unnoticed, unremarked, forgotten. The pattern isn't in the world. It's in your attention. Mystical pattern binding is the process of attaching spiritual or cosmic significance to patterns that are either coincidental or self-created through selective attention. It's what happens when the brain's pattern detection system meets the need for meaning. The pattern gets elevated beyond probability, beyond randomness. It becomes a message, a sign, proof that something larger is watching, communicating, guiding. The binding strengthens through repetition. You see the number again. It confirms the belief. You start expecting it. And expectation primes perception. You glance at the clock more often at 33 past the hour. You remember receipts that end in 333 and forget the ones that don't. The pattern feeds itself. And the more you see it, the more meaningful it becomes. Until it stops being a coincidence and starts being a connection. A thread linking you to something beyond yourself. This shows up across belief systems. Repeated imagery in dreams. Synchronistic encounters with specific animals. Songs that play at meaningful moments. The pattern could be anything. What matters is that it repeats, or seems to, and that you assign it weight. Once the binding forms, the pattern becomes part of your reality. A lens through which you interpret events. A framework for decision-making. A signal you trust more than logic. Mystical pattern binding doesn't make you irrational. It makes you human. The brain needs meaning. It needs order. And when randomness offers even the faintest hint of structure, the mind binds to it, elevates it, treats it as sacred. Because believing the pattern is real, that the universe is speaking, feels better than accepting that most of what you notice is just noise. Just coincidence. Just your own attention creating the very thing it's looking for. Attribution to fate. You almost missed the train, but you made it. And on that train you met someone who changed your life. A mentor, a partner, a friend. Looking back, the timing feels impossible. If you'd left 1 minute later, you would have missed it. Missed them. Missed everything that followed. It wasn't luck. It was fate. It had to happen. You were meant to be on that train, but you weren't meant to be anywhere. You ran. You made it. The person happened to be there. The conversation happened to start. None of it was written. None of it was guaranteed. It was timing, probability, a series of independent choices that happened to intersect. But the outcome was so significant that the brain can't accept randomness as the explanation. So it reeks for something bigger. Fate, destiny. A plan you were always part of. Attribution to fate is the tendency to interpret meaningful outcomes as predetermined rather than coincidental. It's the belief that certain events were always going to happen, that the universe arranged circumstances to ensure a specific result. that your role was to follow the path, not create it. And once you frame an event as fated, everything leading up to it gets reinterpreted as necessary, as steps you had to take, as a design unfolding exactly as intended. The attribution intensifies with hindsight. When you look back at how things turned out, the path seems clear, inevitable. You see the moments that mattered and forget the moments that didn't. You connect the dots in a straight line and call it fate. But at the time, nothing felt inevitable. You were making choices, reacting to circumstances, navigating uncertainty. The straight line only appears after you know the ending, and that backward clarity makes the randomness disappear. Fate attribution also protects against regret. If something was meant to happen, then the mistakes along the way weren't really mistakes. They were necessary. Part of the plan. The bad relationship that ended led you to the right person. The job you lost opened the door to something better. The pain was required for the growth, and believing that makes the pain easier to carry. Because it wasn't wasted, it was preparation. Fate made sure of it. But attributing outcomes to fate removes agency. It makes you a passenger in your own life. It suggests that your choices didn't matter because the result was already decided. And while that might feel comforting when things go well, it's paralyzing when they don't. Because if fate controls the outcome, what's the point of trying? Of choosing differently? Of fighting for something better? The belief in fate turns randomness into destiny. And in doing so, it takes the one thing you actually control, your response to uncertainty, and hands it over to forces that were never there. Causal overfitting. You've been tracking your mood for weeks, and you've found the pattern. You feel better on days when you drink coffee before 9. Worse on days when you skip breakfast. Better when you exercise in the morning. Worse when you check your phone first thing. You've built a model, a system. And as long as you follow it, your mood stays stable. The pattern works, except it doesn't. Because mood doesn't work that way. It's influenced by dozens of variables. Sleep quality, stress levels, social interactions, hormones, weather, life events, most of them invisible, most of them out of your control. But your model only tracks a few, the ones you can measure, the ones you think matter, and when mood aligns with those variables, you call it proof. When it doesn't, you adjust the model. Add another rule. Refine the pattern. Until you've built something so complex it explains everything, and predicts nothing. Causal overfitting is the error of creating an overly complicated explanation for an outcome by forcing too many variables into a causal relationship. It's what happens when you take random variance and treat it as signal. When you assume every fluctuation has a cause you can identify and control, the model becomes so tailored to past data that it loses predictive power. It explains what already happened, but it fails when conditions change. When new variables enter, when randomness refuses to follow the pattern you imposed on it. This happens in every domain. Investors build models that predict market movements based on historical patterns. The models look perfect in hindsight. Every dip explained, every spike accounted for, but the moment they're used to predict the future, they fail. Because the model wasn't capturing real causality. It was overfitting noise. Mistaking correlation for control. People do this with health, with relationships, with productivity. They track everything, find patterns in the data, build routines based on what seemed to work before. And when the routine stops working, they don't question the model. They assume they're not following it correctly, that they missed a variable, that the pattern is still there, just hidden. So they track more. Measure more, adjust more. The model grows, and the further it grows from simplicity, the less useful it becomes. Causal overfitting doesn't make you thorough. It makes you blind. You see causality where there's only coincidence. You build structure where there's only variance. And the more effort you put into refining the model, the harder it becomes to admit that most of what you're tracking doesn't matter. That outcomes fluctuate for reasons you can't measure, can't predict, can't control. And the model, no matter how detailed, will never change that. Pseudo-Pattern Recognition. You're scrolling through data, sales numbers, website traffic, engagement rates, and you see it. A dip every third week. It's subtle, but it's there. You flag it. Run the numbers again. Still there. This is significant. A pattern the team missed. Something cyclical affecting performance. You start digging, looking for the cause, trying to explain why every third week shows a drop. But there is no cause, because the pattern isn't real. It's noise. Random fluctuation within normal variance. The dip doesn't repeat consistently. It just happened to align a few times, and your brain, primed to find patterns, locked onto it, elevated it, turned coincidence into trend, and now you're searching for an explanation that doesn't exist. Building a theory around data that never had structure to begin with. Pseudo-pattern recognition is the brain's tendency to detect patterns in random data and treat them as meaningful. It's what happens when the pattern detection system fires on noise, when clustering gets mistaken for causality, when the mind sees order in chaos not because order exists, but because seeing nothing feels like failure. This shows up constantly in analytics, in trading, in forecasting. People stare at charts long enough, they'll find a pattern, a rhythm, a signal hidden in the static. And once they see it, they can't unsee it. They start making decisions based on it, building strategies around it, betting on it. And when the pattern doesn't hold, they don't question whether it was real. They question their execution, their timing, their understanding of the pattern. The possibility that it was never there doesn't register, because the brain already committed, already filed it as discovered truth. Pseudo-pattern recognition is especially dangerous in small data sets. The fewer data points you have, the easier it is to see patterns that don't exist. 3 data points can form a line, but that doesn't make it a trend. 5 outcomes can look like a cycle, but that doesn't mean it repeats. The brain extrapolates, projects the pattern forward, assumes it will continue. And when it doesn't, the response isn't skepticism, it's adjustment. The pattern must have shifted, must have evolved, must still be there, just harder to see. Breaking pseudo-pattern recognition requires humility, the willingness to admit that what you see might not be real, that the brain's detection system is overly sensitive. That randomness often looks like structure until you test it. But admitting that means accepting uncertainty, accepting that some things can't be predicted, can't be controlled, can't be understood through patterns. And for a mind built to find order, that acceptance feels like giving up. So the search continues. The patterns keep appearing, and the line between signal and noise disappears entirely. Prophetic dream interpretation. You had a dream about water. The next day it rained. You had a dream about an old friend. They texted you that week. You had a dream about conflict. And the following day you got into an argument. The dreams keep coming true. Not all of them, but enough that you've started paying attention, writing them down, treating them as warnings, as glimpses of what's coming, as proof that some part of your mind sees the future. But your mind doesn't see the future. It processes the present. Dreams pull from recent thoughts, unresolved emotions, ambient stress. They're not predictions. They're reflections. And when a dream seems to come true, it's not because the dream knew. It's because the waking world offered so many possibilities that something was bound to match. Prophetic dream interpretation is the belief that dreams can predict future events, and the practice of reading meaning into coincidental alignments between dream content and subsequent experiences. It's a specific form of pattern recognition where the brain takes the randomness of dreaming and the randomness of daily life and finds overlap. And when it does, the overlap gets treated as intentional, as foresight, as evidence that dreams are more than neurological noise. The belief strengthens through selective memory. You remember the dreams that seemed to predict something, the ones where the symbolism aligned with an event. But you forget the hundreds of dreams that didn't, the ones where nothing matched, where the imagery stayed abstract, where the narrative never connected to waking life. The hits get stored, the misses disappear, and the ratio gets distorted, until it feels like most of your dreams come true, when in reality, most of them don't. You just stopped counting those. Prophetic dream interpretation also relies on vague symbolism. Water can mean anything. Rain, a spill. Tears, a conversation about the ocean. The broader the symbol, the easier it is to find a match. So when you dream about water and it rains, that feels specific. But the dream didn't predict rain. It offered an image so flexible that dozens of events could qualify. And one of them happened. Not because the dream knew. Because life is full of moments, and some of them will inevitably align with the symbols your sleeping mind generates. The interpretation doesn't just distort memory. It distorts behavior. If you believe dreams predict the future, you start acting on them, avoiding situations, seeking outcomes, making choices based on symbolism instead of information. And sometimes, that creates a self-fulfilling prophecy. You dream about conflict. You wake up tense. You approach interactions defensively. And the conflict you feared becomes more likely. Not because the dream predicted it, because the dream influenced how you showed up. And the belief in prophecy turned a reflection into a cause. Intuitive probability error. Someone offers you a bet. Flip a coin 10 times. If it lands on heads at least once, you win. If it's tails every single time, you lose. Should you take the bet? Most people hesitate. 10 tails in a row feels unlikely. But not impossible. It could happen. So maybe the bet isn't as safe as it sounds. But it is. The odds of flipping tails 10 times in a row are extremely low. Lower than most people intuitively grasp. The brain doesn't process compounding probability well. It feels like each flip is 50-50, so 10 flips should have a decent chance of going all tails. But the math doesn't work that way. Each flip compounds, and the likelihood of 10 consecutive tails drops fast. Far faster than intuition suggests. The bet is nearly certain, but it doesn't feel that way. Intuitive probability error is the tendency to misjudge the likelihood of events because the brain's intuitive sense of probability doesn't align with actual statistical reality. People overestimate the chance of rare events, underestimate the chance of compound outcomes, misread streaks, misinterpret clustering, and make decisions based on feelings about probability that are often wildly wrong. This shows up in gambling, in investing, in risk assessment. People think a lottery ticket is worth buying because someone has to win. But the odds are so low that buying a ticket is statistically indistinguishable from throwing money away. Yet millions of people play. Because the intuitive sense of probability says, it could be me. And that feeling, however mathematically incorrect, is strong enough to override logic. Intuitive probability error also makes people fear the wrong things. Plane crashes feel more likely than car accidents. Terrorist attacks feel more likely than heart disease. Rare, dramatic events dominate perception because they're memorable, vivid. Vivid, easy to imagine. Meanwhile, common risks fade into background noise. The brain doesn't weigh probability accurately. It weighs emotional impact. And impact distorts the math. The error cuts both ways. People underestimate how quickly compound probability builds. They don't realize how fast exponential growth accelerates. They misjudge the likelihood of coincidence. They assume that because something happened once, it's unlikely to happen again soon. Or they assume that because it hasn't happened yet, it's due. Both wrong. Both driven by intuition that doesn't match the numbers. Breaking intuitive probability error means learning to distrust your gut when it comes to chance. To check the math. To recognize that your brain's sense of likely and unlikely is shaped by emotion, memory, and narrative, not by statistics. And that the feeling of certainty, the feeling that you know how probable something is often the least reliable guide you have. Control ritual reinforcement. You have a process. Before every important meeting, you do the same thing. Same coffee, same rote, same playlist, same playlist. It's not superstition, it's preparation. It puts you in the right headset. And it works. Most of the time. So you keep doing it. Every time. Because the one time you don't, what if that's the time everything falls apart? The ritual started small. A preference. Then it became routine. Then it became mandatory. Now you can't imagine going into a meeting without it. The steps have to happen in order. If something disrupts the sequence, you feel off. Unprepared. Like you're walking into the room without armor. The ritual isn't just helpful anymore. It's required. And skipping it feels dangerous. Control ritual reinforcement is the process by which small behaviors, initially adopted for comfort or focus, become psychologically necessary through repeated association with desired outcomes. The behavior gets linked to success. And even though the link is coincidental, the brain treats it as causal. So the ritual gets locked in. Reinforced every time things go well. And the more you rely on it, the harder it becomes to separate the ritual from the result. The reinforcement works through partial success. Not every meeting goes perfectly, but enough of them do. And when they do, the ritual gets credit. You followed the steps. Things worked out. Pattern confirmed. The failures get explained differently. You were distracted. The circumstances were unusual. The ritual was there, but something else interfered. The ritual itself never gets blamed, so it survives every outcome, strengthened by success, protected from failure. Control rituals show up everywhere. Athletes with pre-game routines they can't break. Writers who need specific conditions to work. Professionals who perform the same sequence before high-stakes moments. The rituals aren't inherently harmful, but they become a problem when the belief in their necessity grows so strong that breaking them creates anxiety. When the ritual stops being a tool and starts being a cage. The danger is that rituals create false dependencies. You start believing you can't perform without them, that your ability is tied to the sequence. And when circumstances force you to skip the ritual, you go in already defeated. Already convinced that without the steps, failure is more likely. And that belief that expectation can become a self-fulfilling prophecy. Not because the ritual mattered, because your confidence was built on it. And without it, the confidence crumbles, leaving you exactly as capable as you always were, but no longer believing it. Random reward learning. You check your phone, nothing. You check again. Still nothing. Third time a message. You feel the hit, the small rush. So you keep checking, because sometimes there's something, and you never know when. That uncertainty, that randomness, is exactly what keeps you coming back. This is how slot machines work, how social media works, how any system built on variable rewards works. The reward doesn't come every time. It comes unpredictably. And that unpredictability makes the behavior harder to stop than if the reward came consistently. Because when you don't know which action will pay off, you keep trying. Just in case. Just one more time. Random reward learning is the process by which behaviors become compulsive when they're reinforced on an unpredictable schedule. Psychologists call it a variable ratio schedule. And it's one of the most powerful conditioning mechanisms the brain responds to. More powerful than consistent rewards. More resistant to extinction. Because the randomness keeps hope alive. The next attempt might be the one that works. And you can't afford to stop right before the payoff. The learning happens unconsciously. You don't decide to get hooked on checking your phone. You just do it enough times, get rewarded often enough, and the behavior locks in. The brain starts associating the action with the possibility of reward. And possibility, when it's random, feels more compelling than certainty. Because certainty gets boring. Predictable. But randomness stays interesting. Keeps you engaged. Keeps you trying. This is why gambling is addictive. Why people refresh feeds endlessly. Why they keep texting someone who responds inconsistently. The pattern isn't reliable, but it's not absent either. It's random, and random feels like it could turn in your favor at any moment. So you keep going, keep checking, keep playing. The behavior becomes automatic, compulsive, driven not by logic, but by the brain's response to variable reinforcement. Breaking random reward learning requires recognizing the pattern. Understanding that the randomness isn't a bug. It's the feature. It's what's keeping you locked in. And the only way out is to stop feeding the loop. To accept that the next check, the next attempt, the next try won't feel different. Because the system isn't designed to satisfy you. It's designed to keep you uncertain. Hoping. Trying. And as long as you're trying, the learning continues. And the behavior stays locked. Near-miss significance. The slot machine spins. 2 cherries, then another cherry, then a lemon. So close. 1 symbol away from winning. You almost had it. That means the win is coming. The machine is warming up. 1 more try. You were right there. But you weren't right there. You lost. The near miss feels different than a complete miss. It feels like progress. Like you're getting closer. But the machine doesn't work that way. Each spin is independent. The symbols are random. Being 1 symbol away from a win doesn't mean the next spin is more likely to hit. It just means this spin didn't. But the brain doesn't process it that way. The brain treats near misses as almost wins. And almost wins feel like encouragement, like validation, like proof that persistence will pay off. Near-miss significance is the psychological effect where outcomes that come close to success are perceived as more meaningful than complete failures, even though they're functionally identical. Losing by 1 is still losing. But it doesn't feel that way. It feels like you were close. Like the system is responding to you. Like you're on the right track. And that feeling keeps you playing. This effect is everywhere. You apply for a job. You make it to the final round. You don't get it. That feels different than not getting a call back at all. It feels like progress. Like you almost made it. Like next time you'll get it. And maybe you will. But the near miss itself doesn't predict that. It's just an outcome. One that happened to align closely with success without actually reaching it. Near misses are especially powerful in games of chance. Lottery tickets that match most of the numbers. Bets that almost hit. Spins that land 1 symbol away. These outcomes are designed to feel significant. To create the illusion of progress. To make you think the system is paying attention. That your chances are improving. But they're not. The odds haven't changed. You're just experiencing the emotional weight of an outcome that looked like success without being it. Near-miss significance keeps people trapped in losing situations. Because the losses don't feel like complete failures. They feel like almosts. Like you're getting warmer. Like the breakthrough is just ahead. And that belief, that feeling of proximity, makes it harder to walk away. Harder to see that close doesn't count. That almost isn't progress. That the near miss is just another loss dressed up to keep you engaged. Destiny framing. Looking back, everything makes sense. The job you didn't get led you to the one you have now. The relationship that ended made space for the right person. The detour brought you exactly where you needed to be. It all happened for a reason. It was all part of the plan. You were always supposed to end up here. But you weren't supposed to end up anywhere. You made choices. You adapted. You responded to circumstances. And the path you took is just one of many paths you could have taken. The fact that it led here doesn't mean it was destined. It means you navigated. And now, knowing the outcome, you're rewriting the journey as inevitable. As designed. As fate. Destiny framing is the cognitive tendency to reinterpret past events as necessary steps toward a predetermined outcome, especially when the outcome is positive or meaningful. It's a form of hindsight bias. You know how the story ends, so you reshape the plot to make the ending feel inevitable. The randomness disappears. The uncertainty gets smoothed over, and what was actually a series of contingent choices becomes a straight line toward destiny. The framing protects you from regret. If the bad things were necessary, then they weren't mistakes. They were lessons. Preparation. Part of the design. The pain had purpose. The failures were required. And believing that makes the past easier to carry. Because nothing was wasted. Everything mattered. Everything led here. But destiny framing removes agency. It suggests that you were following a script. That your choices didn't shape the outcome because the outcome was already written. And while that might feel comforting, it's a lie. You shaped the outcome. You made the path. The fact that you can tell a coherent story about it afterward doesn't mean the story was written in advance. It just means the brain is good at creating narrative from randomness. Destiny framing also creates false expectations. If you believe past events were destined, you start expecting future events to follow the same logic. That things will work out. That struggles are just setups. That everything happens for a reason. And when life doesn't cooperate, when randomness delivers something you can't frame as destiny, the belief shatters. Because destiny only works in hindsight. Only works when you know the ending. And the future doesn't come with that certainty. It comes with choices, with contingency. With outcomes you can't predict or control, and no amount of framing will change that. Conspiracy pattern seeking. Something doesn't add up. The official story has gaps. The timing feels too convenient. The coincidences are too aligned. There's more going on here. Connections the mainstream narrative is ignoring. Patterns hiding in plain sight. You start digging. And the more you look, the more you find. Links between events. Shared names. Financial ties. It's all connected. And once you see it, you can't unsee it. But the connections aren't real. Or they're trivial. Or they're coincidental. You're finding patterns because you're looking for them. And when you look hard enough at any complex event, you'll find threads. Data points that seem to align. Associations that feel too specific to be random. But random doesn't mean evenly distributed. It means clustering. It means coincidence. It means that in a world full of information, some of it will appear connected without actually being connected. Conspiracy pattern seeking is the tendency to detect intentional design, hidden coordination, or secret causality in events that are better explained by chance, complexity, or mundane causes. It's pattern recognition on overdrive. The brain is searching for the hidden hand, the coordinated effort, the plan behind the chaos. And when the world refuses to be simple, when events don't fit into neat explanations, the mind reeks for conspiracy. For a story where randomness is replaced by intention. Where nothing happens by accident. Where someone somewhere is in control. The seeking intensifies with distrust. If you don't trust the official explanation, you start building your own. And every piece of information that doesn't fit the mainstream narrative gets absorbed into the conspiracy. gets treated as evidence. Meanwhile, information that contradicts the conspiracy gets dismissed, explained away, reframed as misdirection. The pattern becomes unfalsifiable, because every contradiction just proves how deep the conspiracy goes. Conspiracy pattern seeking isn't inherently irrational. Sometimes there are actual conspiracies, real coordination, hidden motives. But the difference between healthy skepticism and conspiracy thinking is testability. Healthy skepticism looks for evidence that could disprove the theory. Conspiracy thinking doesn't. It interprets all evidence as confirmation, all gaps as proof of cover-up, all complexity as design. The danger is that conspiracy thinking isolates. It separates you from people who don't see the patterns. It makes trust impossible. Because if the conspiracy is real, then anyone who denies it is either blind or complicit. And once you believe that, once you've framed the world as a battle between the enlightened and the deceived, there's no way back. The pattern you found becomes your reality, and everything that contradicts it becomes part of the lie. Personal sign reading. You see a feather on the sidewalk. You've been thinking about someone who passed away. The feather feels like a message, a sign they're still here, still watching. You take it as confirmation, as comfort, as proof that the connection didn't end. Or you're struggling with a decision. You ask the universe for a sign, and then a song plays. The lyrics speak directly to your situation. That's the answer. That's the guidance you needed. You make your choice based on it. Based on the belief that the universe responded, that the sign was real. Personal sign reading is the practice of interpreting random or ambiguous events as meaningful messages directed specifically at you, often from a spiritual source, deceased loved one, or the universe itself. It's a personalized form of pattern recognition where the brain takes coincidence and transforms it into communication, into intention, into a message meant just for you. The reading works because the signs are vague. A feather doesn't say anything specific. A song lyric can mean dozens of things. The meaning comes from you, from your interpretation, from the context you bring to the moment. And because you're providing the meaning, the sign always feels relevant, always feels accurate, because you made it that way. Personal sign reading intensifies with need. When you're grieving, you're more likely to see signs from the deceased. When you're uncertain, you're more likely to see guidance. The brain is scanning for anything that might offer clarity, comfort, connection, and neutral events that happen constantly without anyone noticing, get flagged as significant. Get treated as answers. Not because they changed, because your need changed how you see them. The practice isn't inherently harmful. If interpreting a feather as a sign brings comfort, that comfort is real, even if the sign isn't. But it becomes a problem when you start depending on external signs to make decisions. When you stop trusting your own judgment and start waiting for the universe to tell you what to do. Because the universe isn't speaking. You're interpreting noise as language, and the more you rely on that interpretation, the less capable you become of acting without it, of choosing without permission, of trusting yourself instead of searching the world for signs that were never meant to be read. Sacred coincidence belief. Two strangers meet. They discover they were born on the same day, in the same hospital. They both moved to the same city years later without knowing each other. And now, sitting in the same coffee shop, they realize they've been living parallel lives. This isn't chance. This is sacred. The universe brought them together. For a reason. For a purpose. The coincidence is too perfect to be random. But random doesn't mean impossible. It means unpredictable. And in a world with billions of people, billions of interactions, billions of moments, extraordinary coincidences happen constantly. Not because the universe is arranging them, because probability allows for clustering, for alignment. for moments that feel too specific to be chance, even though chance is exactly what they are. Sacred coincidence belief is the conviction that certain highly improbable coincidences carry spiritual or cosmic significance and were orchestrated by forces beyond normal causality. It's the elevation of coincidence from statistical event to meaningful message, from randomness to divine intervention. And once the coincidence gets labeled sacred, it stops being questioned. It becomes proof, evidence, a foundation for belief that can't be shaken by logic or math. The belief gains power from emotional weight. The coincidences that get labeled sacred aren't trivial. They happen during grief, during searching, during moments of transition, when you're vulnerable, when you need meaning. And when a coincidence arrives in that state, it doesn't feel random. It feels like an answer, like the universe reaching out, like confirmation that you're not alone, that something is watching, caring, responding. Sacred coincidence belief shows up in every culture, in every belief system. The specifics change, the interpretation shifts, but the core is the same. Improbable alignment gets treated as intentional, as designed, as sacred. And the people who experience it don't just remember the coincidence. They build their worldview around it. It becomes the moment they knew, the proof they can point to, the foundation of their certainty that something beyond the material is real. But treating coincidence as sacred creates a closed system. Because once you believe the universe orchestrates meetings, you start seeing orchestration everywhere. Every alignment becomes validation. Every meaningful moment becomes another thread in the design. And the possibility that it was always just probability, always just the natural clustering of randomness, becomes unthinkable. Because accepting that would mean the sacred moment wasn't sacred. It was just luck. And that's a truth the mind, once it's committed to meaning, refuses to accept. Magical contagion. You wouldn't wear a sweater that belonged to a murderer, even if it's been washed, even if it's clean. Something about it feels wrong, tainted, like the person's essence is still in the fabric. Like wearing it would transfer something, contaminate you, make you part of what they did. This isn't rational. The sweater is just cotton, thread, dye. There's no physical residue of morality, no molecules of guilt. But the brain doesn't process it that way. The brain treats objects as if they carry invisible properties from their owners, as if contact creates transfer, as if proximity equals contamination, or blessing, depending on the source. Magical contagion is the belief that objects, places, or people can acquire and transmit non-physical properties through contact or association. It's the idea that essence transfers, that something intangible moves from one thing to another just by touching. And even though there's no mechanism for this transfer, the belief persists. Because the feeling of contamination, or sacredness, is real, even if the cause isn't. Contagion works in both directions, positive and negative. You treasure an object because someone you love touched it. You avoid a location because something terrible happened there. You feel different wearing a celebrity's jacket, calmer holding a religious artifact. The object hasn't changed, but your relationship to it has, because you believe it carries something from its history, from its contact, from the people or events it was near. The belief shapes behavior constantly. People pay more for items owned by famous people, not because the items are better, because they were touched by someone significant. The contact is what matters, the imagined transfer of essence. People also refuse to use objects associated with tragedy. A chair where someone died, a building where something awful happened. The space is physically unchanged, but emotionally it's marked, contaminated, and the contamination feels real enough to avoid. Magical contagion doesn't make you superstitious. It makes you human. The brain struggles to separate physical properties from symbolic ones. It treats meaning as if it's transferable, as if contact creates connection. And while that might have helped early humans navigate social structures, maintain group cohesion, and honor the dead in modern contexts, it just creates invisible rules about what you can touch, what you can wear, what spaces you can occupy, all based on transfers that never happened, properties that were never real, and contamination that exists only in the belief that it. Probability blindness. You buy a lottery ticket. Someone has to win, right? And if someone has to win, why not you? The odds are terrible. You know that. But someone's going to beat those odds. And there's no reason it can't be you this time. Except there is. The odds are millions to 1. Your chance of winning is so close to 0 that buying the ticket is functionally identical to not buying it. But that's not how it feels. Because the brain doesn't process extreme improbability well. It hears someone will win and translates that to I could win. And the gap between those two statements, the gap where the actual math lives, disappears. Probability blindness is the cognitive inability to accurately perceive and respond to extreme odds, especially when unlikely outcomes are emotionally appealing or vivid. The brain understands probability in theory, but it can't feel the difference between 1 in 1,000 and 1 in 1,000,000. Both feel like unlikely but possible. And that feeling overrides the numbers. Makes terrible bets seem reasonable. Makes infinitesimal chances feel worth pursuing. The blindness shows up everywhere. People underestimate the time it takes for compound interest to build wealth. They overestimate their chances of being in a plane crash. They misjudge how quickly exponential growth accelerates. They treat rare events as if they're more common than they are, and common events as if they're rare. All because the brain doesn't have an intuitive sense for numbers beyond a certain scale. Can't feel the weight of probability when the numbers get extreme. Probability blindness makes people vulnerable to scams, to bad investments, to risky decisions, because the pitch always focuses on the possibility, not the probability. You could win. This could be your big break. Imagine if it works. And the brain locks onto the imagine, onto the could. The actual odds, the actual likelihood get treated as details, as noise, as something that applies to other people but not to you. Breaking probability blindness requires forcing yourself to engage with the math, to calculate, to compare, to visualize what 1 in 1,000,000 actually means. But even then, the feeling persists. The sense that unlikely isn't the same as impossible. That someone has to be the exception. And maybe, just maybe, it could be you. Even though the numbers, cold and indifferent, say it won't be. Unexpected event meaning inflation. Your car breaks down on the way to an important meeting. You miss it. Later that day, you hear the meeting went badly. People got into arguments. Decisions were made you wouldn't have agreed with. And suddenly, the breakdown doesn't feel like bad luck. It feels like protection. Like something kept you away for a reason. Like you were supposed to miss that meeting. But you weren't supposed to miss anything. Your car broke because something mechanical failed. The meeting went badly because of the people in it, not because you weren't there. The timing aligned. But alignment isn't causation, and protection isn't the same as coincidence. Yet the brain treats them as identical, because the unexpected event led to an outcome that, in hindsight, feels beneficial. And that benefit gets inflated into meaning, into intention, into proof that the universe intervened. Unexpected event meaning inflation is the tendency to assign disproportionate significance to unplanned disruptions when they're followed by outcomes that can be reinterpreted as fortunate. It's a specific form of hindsight bias where random interference gets upgraded to divine intervention, where obstacles become blessings in disguise, where every detour, every delay, every failure to execute the plan becomes evidence that something larger was guiding you away from harm or towards something better. The inflation intensifies with narrative. You tell the story. I was supposed to be there, but my car broke down. And it turned out, the story feels meaningful, cohesive, like the breakdown was the first domino. The moment everything shifted, but the story is built backward. You know the ending, so you reshape the beginning to match. You elevate the car trouble from inconvenience to intervention, from randomness to rescue. Unexpected event meaning inflation creates a distorted relationship with obstacles. Every setback becomes reframed as protection. Every failure as redirection. And while that reframing can provide comfort, can make disappointment easier to carry, it also removes accountability. If every obstacle is the universe saving you from something worse, then you never have to examine your choices. Your planning, your execution. The obstacle did it. The universe decided. And you were just along for the ride. The inflation doesn't just rewrite the past. It shapes the future. If you believe unexpected events are meaningful, you start treating disruptions as signals, as signs to stop, to change course, to trust the interference. And sometimes that might lead somewhere good, but more often it just makes you passive, waiting for obstacles to tell you what to do, interpreting randomness as guidance, and mistaking the universe's silence for permission to stop trying. Pseudo-Diagnosticity. You're trying to figure out if someone likes you, so you pay attention. They smiled when you walked in. That's a good sign. They didn't text back immediately. That's a bad sign. They laughed at your joke. Good. They left early. Bad. You're gathering evidence, building a case, and by the end of the day, you've diagnosed the situation. They're interested. Or they're not, based on the signals you tracked. But you didn't track the right signals. You didn't compare. You noticed the smile but ignored how they smile at everyone. You flagged the delayed text but didn't check if they were busy. You counted the laugh but missed that they laugh at everything. You're diagnosing based on incomplete data, on signals that feel relevant but aren't actually diagnostic. And the conclusion you reached, confident as it feels, is built on noise. Pseudo-Diagnosticity is the error of basing judgments on information that feels informative but lacks true diagnostic value, often because alternative explanations or comparative data are ignored. It's what happens when you focus on whether something happened without asking whether it would have happened anyway. Without checking the base rate. Without comparing your case to the norm. The error shows up in medical self-diagnosis. You have a headache. You search symptoms online. The results list serious conditions. Brain tumor, stroke, meningitis. You start diagnosing yourself. But you didn't check how common headaches are, how rare those conditions are, how many other mundane explanations exist. You focused on the match between your symptom and the scary possibility. And that match felt diagnostic, felt like evidence, even though it wasn't. Pseudo-diagnosticity makes people overconfident in weak conclusions. They think they've figured something out because they noticed a pattern. But the pattern isn't unique, isn't specific, isn't actually diagnostic of the thing they concluded. A person being nice doesn't diagnose interest. A symptom matching a disease doesn't diagnose the disease. A correlation doesn't diagnose causation. But the brain treats all of these as if they do, because noticing the match feels like discovery, like insight, like proof. Breaking pseudo-diagnosticity requires asking better questions. Not just, did this happen? But would this have happened anyway? Not just, does this match? But what else could this mean? Not just, do I see a pattern? But is this pattern actually informative? Because until you ask those questions, until you check the alternatives, your diagnosis isn't a diagnosis. It's just a guess dressed up as certainty. And the confidence you feel is the most dangerous part. Because it stops you from checking, from comparing, from realizing that what you thought was evidence was just noise all along. event linking bias. Two things happen in the same day. You have a fight with a friend in the morning. You spill coffee on yourself in the afternoon. That night, your phone dies. None of these events are related. But your brain links them anyway. It's one of those days. Everything's going wrong. The universe is against you. One bad thing triggered the rest. But bad things don't trigger other bad things. They just cluster. Randomness doesn't distribute evenly. Sometimes multiple unrelated negative events happen close together. Not because they're connected, because that's what randomness does. It clumps. And when the clumping happens in a short window, the brain imposes a narrative, creates a link. Turns coincidence into causation. Event linking bias is the tendency to perceive causal or thematic connections between temporally proximate events, even when no actual relationship exists. It's the brain's refusal to accept that things just happen. That proximity doesn't equal causality. That because two events occurred in the same time frame doesn't mean one caused the other or that both stem from the same source. The bias creates false patterns everywhere. You get sick the day after trying a new restaurant. You assume the food caused it. But incubation periods don't work that way. You were probably already exposed. The restaurant is unrelated, but the timing makes it feel connected. So you avoid the place. Tell people it made you sick. Build a story where the link is real, even though it never was. Event linking bias also inflates significance. You have a thought about someone. They call. You link the thought to the call. Treat it as telepathy, as connection, as proof that thoughts can reach across distance. But you have thoughts about dozens of people every day. Most of them don't call. You just don't remember those. The one time the thought and the call align, you link them. And the link feels too specific to be random. So it gets filed as meaningful. As evidence. As a pattern worth trusting. The bias doesn't just distort memory. It distorts future expectations. Once you've linked events, you start expecting the link to repeat. You think if A happens, B will follow. So you brace for B. You prepare for it. You see signs of it even when it's not coming. And when B doesn't happen, you don't question the link. You assume you disrupted it. Or that B is still coming, just delayed. The link survives. Because the brain doesn't give up patterns easily. Even when the pattern was never real to begin with. Random sequence suspicion. You flip a coin 5 times. It lands heads, tails, heads, tails, heads. That looks random. Now flip it 5 more times. Heads, 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 heads. That doesn't look random. That looks rigged. Something's wrong with the coin. Or someone's cheating. Because random doesn't do that. Random alternates. Spreads things out. Balances. But random does exactly that. Random allows streaks. Clusters. Runs of the same outcome. That's what makes it random. If a system prevented streaks, if it forced alternation, it wouldn't be random anymore. It would be controlled. But the brain doesn't expect that. The brain expects randomness to look uniform, to avoid repetition. And when it doesn't, suspicion kicks in. Something must be interfering. Because true randomness couldn't look this uneven. Random sequence suspicion is the tendency to doubt the authenticity of genuinely random sequences when they contain pattern streaks or clusters that don't align with intuitive expectations of what randomness should look like. It's the cognitive error of rejecting real randomness because it doesn't match the mental model. And that model is wrong. But it feels right. So the actual randomness gets flagged as fake. This shows up in gambling. A roulette wheel hits the same color multiple times in a row. Players start whispering. The game is rigged. The wheel is broken. It has to be. Because the odds of that happening feel impossible. But they're not. They're within the normal range of random variation. Streaks happen. They're supposed to happen. But when they do, people don't see randomness. They see manipulation. Random sequence suspicion also distorts how people create fake randomness. If you ask someone to write down a fake coin flip sequence, they'll alternate too much. They'll avoid streaks. They'll make it look balanced. Because that's what they think random looks like. But statisticians can spot fake randomness easily. It's too even, too clean. Real randomness is messy. It clumps. It streaks. It creates patterns that look deliberate but aren't. Breaking random sequence suspicion means accepting that your intuition about randomness is unreliable. That the patterns you see aren't evidence of interference. They're evidence that randomness is working exactly as it should. But that acceptance is hard. Because when you see 5 heads in a row, every instinct says something's wrong. And trusting the math over the instinct feels like ignoring obvious evidence. Even when the evidence was never there to begin with. Illusory correlation. Every time you wear your blue shirt, you have a good day. You've noticed it. Multiple times. The pattern is clear. The shirt is lucky. It's not superstition. It's observation. The correlation is real. You've tracked it. Blue shirt equals good day. Except you haven't actually tracked it. You've noticed it. Which isn't the same thing. You remember the times the blue shirt preceded a good day. But you don't remember the times you wore it and the day was average. Or bad. You don't remember the good days when you wore something else. The brain is selectively filing instances that support the pattern and ignoring instances that don't. And that selective memory creates a correlation that doesn't exist. Illusory correlation is the perception of a relationship between 2 variables when no actual statistical relationship exists, typically formed through biased attention and selective recall. It's seeing a pattern that isn't there because the brain only counts the hits. The times when both things aligned, and forgets the misses. The times when one happened without the other, or neither happened at all. This happens constantly. You think you get sick every time you fly, but you've flown dozens of times without getting sick. You just don't remember those flights. You remember the 2 times you got sick afterward. And those 2 instances feel like a pattern, like causation. Like evidence that flying makes you sick. But the correlation is illusory, built from incomplete data. From memory that only stored the alignments. Illusory correlation fuels stereotypes. You meet 2 people from the same group who share a trait. You assume the trait is common in that group. But you've met dozens of people from that group who don't have the trait. You just didn't notice. Because the trait wasn't salient. Wasn't memorable. The 2 instances where it appeared got stored. The dozens where it didn't got ignored. And the illusory correlation becomes a belief. A generalization. A pattern you're certain is real. Breaking illusory correlation requires actual tracking. Writing it down. Counting the hits and the misses. Checking whether the relationship holds when you account for all instances, not just the memorable ones. But most people don't do that, because the illusion feels like observation, like data, like proof. And checking it, really checking it, risks discovering that the pattern you've been trusting was never real, that the correlation was always in your head. And that's a truth the mind, once convinced, is reluctant to face. Fake confirmation loop. Something bad happens. You lose your keys. Your coffee spills. Traffic is terrible. And you think, today is just one of those days. So you brace for more. You expect things to keep going wrong. And they do. Your card gets declined. You forget an appointment. Your phone dies. See. You knew it. The day was cursed from the start. Fate was against you. But fate didn't cause the rest. You did. Once you decided it was one of those days, you started behaving differently. You got tense. Distracted. You stopped paying attention because you were already expecting disaster. and that expectation made disaster more likely. You forgot the appointment because you were stressed about the earlier problems. Your card declined because you weren't tracking your balance. The phone died because you didn't charge it. The belief in a cursed day created the very pattern it predicted. Fate confirmation loop is the self-reinforcing cycle where belief in predetermined outcomes influences behavior in ways that make those outcomes more likely, which then reinforces the belief in fate. It's a feedback system. You believe something is destined. You act based on that belief. The belief shapes the outcome, and the outcome confirms the belief. The loop closes, and every iteration makes it stronger. The loop works with positive fate too. You wake up feeling lucky. You take more risks. You talk to people you normally wouldn't. You try things you'd usually skip. And some of them work out. Not because you were lucky, because you were more active, more engaged, more willing to take chances. The belief in a lucky day created opportunities. And when opportunities converted, the luck felt real. Felt confirmed. Felt like proof that fate was on your side. Fate confirmation loops are dangerous because they feel like validation. You predicted the day would go badly. It did. You predicted it would go well. It did. The pattern seems to prove that fate is real. That some days are just destined to unfold a certain way. But the pattern is circular. The belief creates the behavior. The behavior creates the outcome. And the outcome feeds back into the belief. You're not predicting fate. You're creating it. And then mistaking your own influence for cosmic design. Breaking the loop means catching the belief before it shapes behavior. Recognizing that cone of those days isn't a prophecy. It's a frame, and frames are choices. You can choose to interpret the lost keys as bad luck and brace for disaster. Or you can treat them as an isolated inconvenience and move on. The day doesn't change, but your response does. And that response, more than any external fate, determines what happens next. Ambiguous sign dependence. You're trying to decide whether to take a new job. You're torn. The pros and cons feel balanced. So you start looking for signs, a conversation that feels relevant, a song with meaningful lyrics, a number that keeps appearing, something external, something clear, something that will tell you what to do, and eventually you find it. A sign that feels specific enough, definitive enough. You make your decision based on it. The universe gave you an answer, but the universe didn't give you anything. You went looking for a sign, and you kept searching until you found something that could be interpreted as one. The sign wasn't clear. It was ambiguous. Vague enough to mean multiple things, but you needed direction. So you assigned it meaning, made it specific, turned it into the answer you were waiting for, and now you're acting on it. Not because it was actually a sign, because you needed it to be. Ambiguous sign dependence is the reliance on unclear, interpretable external events to make decisions, especially when internal uncertainty is high. It's outsourcing judgment to randomness, to coincidence, to anything that can be framed as guidance. And the more ambiguous the sign, the easier it is to shape into whatever answer you need. The universe isn't speaking. You're ventriloquizing, putting your own voice into external events and pretending it came from somewhere else. The dependence grows with indecision. When you can't choose, when the options feel equally weighted, the pressure to find external confirmation increases. You want someone or something to decide for you, to take the weight off. And ambiguous signs provide that relief. They let you act without fully owning the choice. Because it wasn't your decision. It was the sign, the universe, fate, whatever you want to call the external force you're pretending gave you permission. Ambiguous sign dependence doesn't just delay decisions. It erodes confidence. Because every time you rely on a sign, you reinforce the belief that you can't trust your own judgment. that you need external validation to act. And the more you depend on signs, the less capable you become of choosing without them. You stop asking yourself what you want. You start asking the universe. And the universe, indifferent and silent, just reflects your own uncertainty back at you, dressed up as a message you were always going to interpret the way you needed to. Story making from chance. You meet someone at a coffee shop. You start talking. 6 months later, you're dating. Looking back, the whole thing feels destined. If you'd arrived 5 minutes earlier, you would have missed them. If you'd gone to a different coffee shop, you never would have met. Every small decision led to this moment. It's a story. A narrative. A series of choices and coincidences that had to happen exactly this way for you to end up together. It feels meaningful. Intentional. Like the universe was writing it all along. But it wasn't. You made choices. They made choices. The timing aligned because it happened to align. Not because it had to. If you'd gone somewhere else, you might have met someone else. Or no one. And that outcome would have its own story. Its own series of events that felt just as meaningful in hindsight. The story doesn't prove the outcome was destined. It proves the brain is good at turning randomness into narrative. Story making from chance is the cognitive process of constructing coherent, meaningful narratives from random or contingent events, especially when the outcome is emotionally significant. It's taking a sequence of unrelated moments and connecting them into a plot. Giving them structure, causality, inevitability. The story feels true because it explains how you got here, but it's built backward. You know the ending. So you reshape everything that came before to point toward it. The story making intensifies with emotion. The more you care about the outcome, the more detailed the story becomes. You don't just remember meeting at the coffee shop. You remember the near misses, the almosts, the decisions that could have gone differently. And each one gets framed as a turning point. A moment where fate intervened. Where the path could have forked, but didn't. Because it wasn't supposed to. Because this was always the story being written. Story making from chance isn't harmless. It distorts how you see choice. How you understand agency. Because if every moment was a necessary step toward a predetermined outcome, then your decisions didn't matter. You were following a script. Walking a path that was already laid. And while that might feel comforting, might make the outcome feel more secure, it also removes your role, your influence, your power to shape what happens next. Because if the story is already written, all you can do is wait to see how it unfolds, and hope the narrative stays kind. Meaning hunger in randomness. Randomness is unbearable. Events happen for no reason. Outcomes don't connect to effort. Good people suffer. Bad people thrive. There's no plan, no design, no justice, just chance, rolling forward, indifferent. And the mind can't accept that, so it searches for patterns, for reasons, for anything that makes randomness feel less random, less meaningless, less cold. This isn't a flaw, it's a need. The brain is built to find meaning, to impose order, to create narrative from chaos, because meaning provides direction, motivation, a sense that actions matter, that the world makes sense. And when randomness threatens that sense, when events refuse to fit into a pattern, the hunger for meaning intensifies. The mind reeks harder, looks deeper, finds connections that aren't there, builds stories that don't hold, just to avoid the alternative. That sometimes things just happen, and nothing you do will change that. Meaning hunger in randomness is the psychological drive to find significance, purpose, or causality in random events because accepting pure chance feels intolerable. It's the force behind every pattern-seeking bias, every superstition, every belief that the universe is listening, responding, caring. Because the alternative, that the universe isn't listening, that randomness governs more than we'd like to admit, is too destabilizing to accept. The hunger shows up after tragedy. People search for reasons, for lessons, for explanations that make the loss feel less arbitrary. They need it to mean something, to serve a purpose, to fit into a larger story where suffering isn't wasted. And when they can't find meaning in the event itself, they create it. They reframe the tragedy as a test, a redirection, a necessary step towards something they haven't seen yet. Not because that's true. Because living with randomness, with the possibility that it meant nothing, is unbearable. Meaning hunger also shows up in success. People don't want to believe they got lucky. That timing mattered more than effort. That randomness played a role. So they build narratives where every choice was strategic. Every outcome was earned. Every success was the result of vision, not variance. The story feels better that way. More controlled, more deserved. And while some of it might be true, the role of chance gets minimized, hidden, rewritten. Because admitting luck was involved feels like admitting you didn't fully earn it. And that admission, for a mind hungry for meaning, is too unsettling to make. Meaning hunger in randomness doesn't make you weak. It makes you human. But it also makes you vulnerable. To false patterns. To empty stories. To beliefs that provide comfort without truth. Because the need for meaning is stronger than the need for accuracy. And when the two conflict, when randomness offers no meaning and the mind demands one anyway, the hunger wins. Every time. And the meaning you find, however fragile, however built on nothing, becomes the lens through which you see the world. Not because it's real. Because the alternative, a world without it, feels like a world you can't live in.